Starting live. All right, we're
All
live.
right. Welcome to the Peatone Library Summer Reading Program. The theme this year is Digging Deeper. And today with us we have some people who dig deeper, sometimes literally, from the CSI department and the Will County Sheriff's Police. These guys do lots of digging and lots of other things. And we have two detectives from the Will County Sheriff's Police. I'm Detective Chris D'Amato, and this is Detective James Iden. This is CSI Eriks, and that's CSI Horn. And we are all here to talk about all the things that detectives and police professionals do to dig deeper. So the way I put this is, I said everybody can be a detective, and a lot of us are detectives in our everyday lives when we do sometimes simple things, but we do them in a way that makes the most sense and saves us the most time and makes us the most effective. Such as, one example I used was, I said, sometimes have you ever come home from grocery shopping with mom or dad, and you get in the house and you bring all the groceries in the house, and then dad says, where's the house key? And you spend all your time looking all over for the house key. Now, using a little bit of common sense to not waste your time, like looking all over in places where the key can't be, and asking a couple of good questions and things like that. So, you're probably familiar with a lot of different detectives that you see on TV, the paranormal detectives that hunt for ghosts. You've probably heard of all the TV shows these days have homicide detectives. You heard about all the missing persons detectives that try to find people that no one has seen from sometimes many, many years. And we talk about private detectives who are not police officers, but they still may do some investigating on their own to help most times businesses or companies find things that have to do with their workplace and any kind of trouble that people may be getting into there. So today we're going to talk about criminal investigations because that's what we do. Because we're all police detectives, that means we just, besides investigating, we also have the responsibility to try to bring people before a judge. If we find enough evidence, which is what the evidence technicians do, that make a case, or sometimes don't make a case, because we never want to bring forward somebody who is, who we don't feel 100% committed the crime. So does anyone else want to talk about some of the things that we do?
Well, how would you guys like to chime in about like some CSI techniques that would be used if you had to locate some keys?
Well, so when we start talking about locating keys, just like Detective D'Amato talked about, CSI Horn and myself, we would come in and we would look for various clues as far as fingerprints are concerned, or if you guys know what DNA is, we would look for blood, we would look for different types of physical evidence. Physical evidence is something that you can touch that would lead us to where the keys may be. So if the dad walks through the house and dad says, you know, I didn't go into the living room, we would not go into the living room. But if he touched the doorknob or touch the doorknob inside of the house, CSI Horn and myself, we would use fingerprint powders, and we would develop fingerprints, which we would call latent, which would be invisible fingerprints, and we would bring that up to the surface. And if we have time, CSI Horn and myself will demonstrate on how we lift fingerprints, but that would also be an indication of where the dad touched as recently, and we can help him find that. As far as becoming a police officer, becoming a detective, is that something that we should maybe cover too, is how to become a police officer?
Sure. I know that my daughter thinks that when she grows up, she's going to be either a CSI, a crime scene investigator, or a police detective. And I've had to remind her, and she's aware of it, that nobody starts off in any of these specialized jobs. We usually do a good amount of time on the street doing patrol work, which is actually very important because we learn not just how people work, but the importance of how we gather evidence and how we take information, and especially how important that is to further a case along. So it's actually the people that you guys see when someone calls 911 and you see some squad cars that usually have markings on them come up, and officers, whether they're from Peatone or the sheriff's office or whatever city you might be in, and they arrive on the scene, it's usually the information that they gather right away that gets the ball rolling towards an investigation. So it's very important that they get sometimes it might seem like they're asking a lot of information, but you never know which is going to be the piece of information that makes the case. So they'll ask everybody where they're from, what their birthday is, their first and last names, what kind of cars they drive. Depending on what kind of case it is, they might ask you even where you go to school or where some of your family live. If you're talking about someone who's missing, whether it can be an older relative that maybe has some dementia and they're forgetful and maybe you're helping look for them, or whether you have a little brother or sister that walked off, you know, all sorts of pretty basic questions like when is the last time you saw them, what were they wearing, and all sorts of other things that we need to look out for people's safety and their well-being, but also to find them. We might want to know if they have any medical conditions. And then we get the ball rolling towards investigating things like that. So the police officers, I don't like to call them regular police officers because everybody has a very important job, but the thing everybody will start doing in a police department is in a patrol car, in a uniform, and they're the ones that respond to the calls when someone calls 911 and the dispatcher picks up the phone and says, what do you need and where are you? And they send the officer, that's the first person that arrives, and that's how we all started off, and probably did probably more than hundreds, probably more like thousands of those types of calls before we even thought about getting into something where we can move beyond that. So you have to start as a regular old police officer, and it's very important what they get to make the case.
I think that for those of you who are out there that live in Peatone, or live in unincorporated Will County, and your parents can kind of tell you if the sheriff's office is going to be the primary responding police department, or maybe like the village of Peatone. Smaller police departments like the village of Peatone don't have the ability to have lots of different types of police officers who do one specific type of job. So they have to be able to do a lot of different types of jobs. So it's very important in places like Peatone, or in places like Beecher or Creed or Frankfurt, that police officers there have a very general, very broad knowledge base of their job, because they may be asked to do a lot of investigative work as detectives, or crime scene processing, or other types of specialty work that big cities might have police officers specialize in. At the Sheriff's Department, we're very fortunate because we are a larger police department, so we have the ability to specialize. But some guys and gals out there like doing, being the first responder, as we call them, the police officers in the marked squad cars with the full uniforms on, because it can be very exciting and they're the first on scene. Whereas in many cases we are not the first on scene, and in many cases we are the last on scene. So it's a very, very unique job, being a patrol officer, because you have the ability to do all the jobs, and you get a very good background in a lot of different things. And then if you have that opportunity, you can kind of decide as you evolve in your police career what maybe you want to do more of all the time. In my case, I wanted to be a detective. Detective D'Amato, obviously detective, and CSI Erickson Horns, well, they wanted to do crime scene investigation work. So
I know in my time in the military, I was also a crime scene investigator, military police investigator, did a lot of the crime scene stuff. Like the detectives have stated, that first responding officer there is the same thing in the military. The first responding MP has a very prolific job as finding the evidence and locking the scene down so that detectives and CSIs can come in and actually get the evidence and process it. And that led me to, when I got out and became a civilian law enforcement officer, that this is what I wanted to do as well. It's good when you find evidence or pieces of remnants of a crime that you can use to connect and help get some type of closure or solving rate to particular crimes within the community. So like I say, we all started off as police officers at V-Cops, patrol cops, different nicknames that we all call each other. But the first primary person on duty, on call, is your V-Cop, okay? And as far as how do you become, each department has I guess a different type of process. I believe our department, you have to have a high school diploma and 60 credit hours of college, and you take the test, of course, and you must pass the test, and then you go through it back background check, and that's how a majority of most departments do it. Whether they have the college requirement or whether they just have the high school requirement, but that's how you generally start out.
The other thing I think we would like to add is that most crimes are not solved in an hour or 30 minutes like on television. Sometimes they are, and that's great, but sometimes cases can go on for years and sometimes decades until they're solved. Many cases, many years ago, were left as they call cold cases. They were left unsolved. They could be murders or somebody was kidnapped or something like that, and they were just never solved. But because as technology has progressed, and we have things like DNA, and our CSI guys can talk to you about DNA, we are able then to make those connections and solve cases that went unsolved for 10, 20, 30 years and bring the bad guys to justice. So it's very important that we preserve whatever evidence that we have on scene, whether we know what to do with it really at that time or not, because somewhere down the line, as technology progresses, we may have that capability someday to be able to use that in furtherance of getting our bad guy.
When we talk about crimes and DNA specifically, like Detective Iden cited, many years ago we didn't have DNA technology to where we were able to eliminate people, and we had to go with old-fashioned fingerprints. Fingerprints today is still the standard of how we mostly identify people. However, DNA has come such a long way to where it is used just as much as fingerprints. And as he also stated, it's not like what you see on TV. You cannot get fingerprints off of a brick. You cannot look at a wall and say that that's blood. There may be blood, there may be something, but there's different techniques and different tools that we use in order to see if something may or may not have blood or have fingerprints or DNA. Your fingerprints are made of mostly water, all right? Everyone has fingerprints, even identical twins, and yes, their fingerprints are different. CSI Erickson and I, and even the detectives, they've all been trained on how to develop latent fingerprints and helping and how to collect that and how to present it towards court so that we can prosecute our bad guy.
So let me ask you guys a question. So when a patrol officer gets to the scene and he or she takes the initial information, what kind of calls would go to a crime scene investigator or would go to a detective? What kind of maybe cases, you wanna talk a little bit about that?
Well, I know as a patrol officer, anytime that we had any type of evidence or anything that we needed to have photographed, we would call you guys out and have you guys take those photographs, because you're the pros when it comes to photography. They receive additional and specialized training in crime scene photography. It is a lot more than just simply taking a picture. They take pictures at varying distances, so they can see the whole room and up close, and they can get a sense of scale, how big is the item. Many times they'll put a measurement down, so we like to call them for that. Chime in.
I think one of the other important things to remember too is, and I had to learn this as a patrol officer, is that things aren't always what they seem, especially in the eyes of a crime scene investigator, because what looks like evidence now, and sometimes great evidence, may turn out to be nothing at all, and other things where you may not have even noticed it or thought it was particularly significant, turns out to be very important evidence. And there are other things where, believe it or not, the evidence changes over time. Everything that we're surrounded by, especially in outside areas, in climates, changes with the seasons, and sometimes evidence is recovered after a thaw, and it may have changed its size or its shape or its composure or what kind of condition it's in and what the CSI investigators are able to get from that. There are other things where it might be something as simple as you went to a house and two people got in a fight, and it doesn't really seem like you need to take photographs, but you do, and it turns out that the CSI investigator may have to go back in a couple days because it might take that long for all those bruises to show up, and you say, boy, this didn't look that bad to begin with, but this turned out to be a very serious case. And what they do and what they know to look for is beyond detectives. We have some idea, but our best idea is to call them, because they will be the experts that can say, hold on, we also need to do this. Some of the things everybody will experience, and it's very, sometimes hard to deal with when you're in the middle of something that's very emotional and the police get called, like most things are. Most people don't, call us to, wish us happy birthday or invite us over for dinner. It's usually something, unfortunately, where when you get called to, try to straighten something out or figure something out. A lot of things when that initial patrol officer arrives, things are very high stress, and it might seem like they're giving a lot of orders and being kind of short and snippy. And it's not because they necessarily have a bad attitude or having a bad day. It may be because they really need to take control of that scene to make sure that the evidence is not contaminated. Things like, something as simple as shifting, when we walk across the carpet into this activity room, we probably kicked up all sorts of carpet fibers that, we're not even aware of and picked them up on our shoes, where crime scene investigators would say, oh, if there's a crime in there, you can't just go walking around in that room. And it might seem something as crazy as, but I just wanna go in my bedroom and get a clean change of clothes or something else. And they might not let you because, everything, that's in there might be a very important piece of evidence. I've seen the, crime scene investigators, they have special techniques. They roll things over different surfaces to pick up fibers and to pick up things that they can test for DNA, like hairs and all sorts of other things. They have special lights that they, use to see what's on there, and anything that we might unintentionally do to ruin that, we would hate to have, a case ruined just because we weren't careful. So keep that in mind sometimes when the police come and they might be pretty bossy in the beginning. It's really in the best interest of making sure that the crime scene investigators can do what they do. And as soon as they don't need to do anything anymore, in my experience, they've always been pretty good about telling people, okay, you can go to your room and get your toy or get what you need. They don't try to keep you on lockdown or, for longer than they need to, but so many things are evidence, and they can really speak to that. That's one thing, early on in my career that I had to learn, that it's not just a room you're walking into. That whole thing is part of the procedure for them gathering evidence, so it's very important.
And like he was saying, a lot of times what we're looking for when we're dealing with a scene, no matter what it is, how big it is or how little it is, what we're looking for is pieces of evidence to either prove something happened or to disprove that something happened. Not to say that everyone lies, or sometimes in the heat of the moment, your recollection, people's recollections on the order of events on how something happened may not have actually happened in that particular order. When that first initial story that you may give, okay, then we're automatically forming a opinion on what we should be looking for and how it should be laid out. And when we see things not laid out the way it is, then we have to come back and ask more questions and like, oh, I forgot I did do this or I did do that. So that's one of the important things that Detective D'Amato is kind of steering towards. We're trying to preserve the evidence in order to get the right person or get the details right so that everything goes forward smoothly.
So one thing that I kind of wanted to cover too is that the four of us are up here, and we've all talked about kind of our individual roles, detectives and crime scene investigators. I kind of wanted to go over a little bit of what an actual crime scene investigator is responsible for, as well as what the detectives are responsible for. Because just like CSI Horn just said, from the time of the 911 call when a crime has been committed, from the time of the 911 call all the way through the process, from the original patrol deputy arriving to crime scene being notified, to detectives being notified, to an arrest being made, to the court process, that is all part of a puzzle. And each one of us sitting up here is a puzzle. So as we described to you, the patrol, your original call would be to the police for help. Your patrol officer would arrive. And as far as determining if there was evidence there, any evidence would be physical, you would call crime scene. So Maurice and I, CSI Horn and I are crime scene investigators, and we are responsible for the identification, the collection, and preservation of evidence.
I think that's a good point. Like CSI, again, CSI Miami, if you ever watch that show, your parents or anything, the CSI investigators, they are investigating, they take physical evidence, but they're also doing interviews and doing detective work as well. That's not typical. I don't know if that's actually in reality anywhere. So they take physical evidence, and then we have evidence in terms of, we take statements and confessions and interview people, so it's, very different.
Right, yeah, so just like you were alluding to, so we're in charge of the physical evidence, the crime scene itself, we're in charge of that. Detectives, they come in, we talk to them, we tell them what we see, they kind of come around and they look. Then their main job is to go and take witness statements, take suspect information, and their job is to talk to people. And that's why they're better talkers than CSI Hornetmen. But that's how we work together. We gather information, we share information, because at the end of the day, our main job, our main focus is to put what I always say, hold the right criminal responsible for what he has done. And that's our main purpose. Okay. So as far as what kind of crimes would be maybe committed to, what kind of crimes do detectives investigate as far as what you guys are generally assigned to?
So Will County breaks down our detective division into separate groups. And although we're in separate groups, we all end up doing a little bit or sometimes a lot of everything because a lot of them overlap. So Detective Ida, he can tell you about financial crime.
It's kind of boring
But,
for youngsters. Well, basically, I investigate crimes that deal with money. Today, everyone has credit cards and identity theft. We've all heard about that, right? So most of my focus in investigations is combating identity theft, credit card fraud, forgery, when somebody signs your name without your knowledge to pretend that they're you. When somebody takes a check and writes a check that you didn't give them authorization to, so they go buy stuff, right? Things like that, anything that has to do with money. Counterfeit goods, if anybody, mom's purse that isn't really a real Gucci or Versace purse, that's against the law. You can't actually have those things. So anything related to fraud, in simple terms, is anything that is pretending to be something that it's not. Fraud cases and money cases is what my main focus is, but like the detective model said, we deal with general crime as well. We're all on-call detectives. We all go through a rotation, just like CSI, where we answer our phone in the middle of the night or off hours. And when that happens, I could be handling a shooting, somebody shooting somebody, or somebody beating up somebody getting into a fight, or even a homicide. So we do general crime, but we also have specializations as well.
Linda, actually, so you're telling me that if I'm 15 and I take my 21-year-old brother ID card and I go to the club and buy alcohol, I can't do that?
You can't do that,
But
no.
we look just like.
No, you can't do that. It's a crime. If you use somebody else's driver's license or put your picture on someone else's driver's license to pretend you're somebody else, that is a crime. And we will come and get you, and you'll have your day in court. So don't do that. But as Detective D'Amato was saying, there is specialization. We have juvenile police officers, and they work in the high schools, and detectives who only investigate crimes that youngsters have committed. We have detectives that are singularly focused on domestic-related issues, when couples get into fights or arguments like that. We have detectives who are now assigned to cold cases that we mentioned earlier. Very serious cases that weren't solved, but people were able to try to solve those cases. We have detectives that are assigned to crimes that happen to people, physical, like whether they've been beaten up or they've been hit by a car or something like that, right? And then we have general property crimes, where if your mailbox was hit by, with a baseball bat by your angry neighbor, or if your car was stolen. So we all have a specialization, and we all deal with general crime as well.
I think another thing that's worth mentioning is that although we are criminal investigators and we talk a lot about crimes that we investigate, we actually spend probably more time than we anticipated investigating things like accidents. And sometimes things look like a crime at the outset, and it turns out that they're just a terrible accident, and it's important to us to be able to prove that there's no bad intentions behind something. Sometimes terrible things happen, and they are accidents, and so sometimes an investigation will take place, and people might be a little offended or a little put off because they say, you know, why are you investigating, this terrible accident of somebody drowning in the swimming pool? It was an accident. Well, it's very important for us to prove that it was an accident, not because we think anybody drowned somebody, but it's very important, to prove that for all sorts of reasons, that to give the family closure and to make sure that, everybody's rights are preserved and that everybody, gets the things that they are, entitled to that come with that. And so some examples are if places have, maybe negligent equipment or they don't take proper care of things, and somebody, falls prey to a terrible accident, it's important that, you know, CSI investigators might be able to measure the tensile strength of a bridge or, some stairs that somebody fell through, and it's very important to prove, the how and the why these things happen. And so, while most of our work is criminal cases, there are some instances where, it's not necessarily criminal in nature, but it's still a police matter because it's important to, investigate it and make sure that, the wrong people don't get accused, and that if it turns out not to be an accident, that the right people do get brought before court, so.
So are you saying there's wrongdoing, but maybe it could be left to lawyers in civil court?
Yeah, there's plenty of that. We don't have any here with us today, but one of the people who, they really do some interesting stuff, are our traffic, investigators, who don't fall necessarily in the detective division, they're in the traffic division, but they do some really cool stuff with measuring how much rubber is on the road, and they can tell how far a car skidded and what direction it was traveling and how fast it was going and what the weather was like and all sorts of things. And they make a 3D model with a special scanner, and they can recreate a traffic crash from if you're at an intersection, the direction each car was going to, how fast they were going to, when they stepped on the brakes, how much they turned the wheel, and all sorts of other things. It's another form of investigation that doesn't necessarily fall under the detective division, but some of the tools they use are also things that our CSI officers use, like they could probably talk to you briefly about the Faro scanner and some of their measuring instruments and things that are really instrumental into getting through these investigations.
If I, right before, just to cut, I think CSI Horn talked about how much education is required to be a police officer. There have been quite a few experts who've opined on this or given their opinion, and a lot of them are judges. And many have come to the conclusion that a modern day police officer requires more additional education or continuing education throughout their career than almost any other field of study, more so than even many doctors or physicians. Our job is constantly changing, and we require additional training always when it comes to mental health training, or both the guys on my left and right here went through extensive training to become certified crime scene investigators. And that's something that you have to kind of take note. If you want to go into law enforcement, you have to be prepared to be a student for life. You're constantly having to go back to school. And although the minimum requirements may say for a police department that you need only an associate's degree, the reality is that you never stop going to school. And most of the police officers that I work with have the equivalent education of at least a master's degree or more. So if you don't like school, well, you're going to have to learn to love school, because you're going to be doing a lot of it. And it's not getting any easier out there. We're being required to take even more and more classes and be experts on more and more things.
So we can talk a little bit about our schools, and before I talk a little bit about our schools, if you guys have any kind of questions, please feel free to, I believe it's texting in or whatever. So then we can answer your
Yeah.
questions. Is there any?
Not yet.
No, okay, great. So, just like everybody was talking about schooling, so we've already talked a little bit about what it takes to become a police officer. The detectives can kind of talk about what it takes to be a detective. As far as crime scene investigators are concerned, our county values education, and they always send us to Northwestern University, University of Tennessee. We are going to University of Illinois. We've been to, those are the three top major. Western Carolina University I went to a couple years ago. So they really value education, and just like Detective Iden was talking about right now, our jobs are constantly changing. With world events going on, we have to know about COVID, we have to know about mental health, we have to know about a lot of things. But when it comes to detectives and crime scene, CSI Horn and myself, we've both been through Northwestern University. We've had to do equivalent of 200 hours, which is, I'm not sure what the equivalent of that is, but it's 200 hours. University of Tennessee, I've been through at least 200 hours there. And then we've gone to Western Carolina University. We all have to be lead homicide investigators. Unfortunately, when we do talk about death scenes, sometimes bad things happen to bad people, and that's why we're here. So every single one of us have to be lead homicide certified through the state of Illinois.
And bad things happen to good people too, unfortunately.
And bad things happen to good people, absolutely, absolutely. Criminal sexual assaults, unfortunately, we have to know about that. Getting into a little bit more specialized, Deputy Horn and myself, we have to be trained in ballistics, and that's gunshots, and how trajectory comes into play. To where, unfortunately, if a gun is fired, CSI Horn and myself, we can determine on where that gun was fired, how that gun was fired, at which direction that gun was fired. We can talk about DNA and blood spatter, as far as that will also determine how the incident took place, and then we relay that information to the detectives. So when they're doing their interviews and their interrogations, they can kind of put two and two together. If my scene doesn't match what their suspect or their witness is saying, we have a saying in the police department, evidence doesn't lie, but people do. So we have to be trained in the physical portion. We also talk about entomology, that's the study of bugs and flies. We could really get into some crazy stuff, but I can tell you this.
Pretty gross.
I don't let a fly land on my food because I know where flies come from. So,
It's pretty gross.
Yeah.
the other things that I have, we also, the photography aspect of it, we have to photo everything. And just like Detective D'Amato was talking about the 3D scanner, which
The Pharaoh.
I'm gonna let CSI Horn talk about the Pharaoh because he is an expert.
Haha, yeah. So the Pharaoh, like detectives were saying, is a 3D camera. And it's really cool because it sits up on a tripod, or you can put it on the floor, and it basically scans the room. You have to have at least 3 or 4 points. Like this room here, I would do only 4 scans, pretty much in a corner. And it will take a photograph, a 3D dimensional photograph of the ceiling, the wall, the floor, and everything how it is will be represented in a computer diagram, and it's really cool. You can actually measure on the computer screen. If I want to say how long was this table, and for some reason, if I, who I was actually here on the scene, didn't measure the table, I can take a compass or a drawing on the line of the table in the drawing, and it will give me the exact measurement of what was in here. We can use it to triangulate things. So like we were saying earlier about the being the first deputy or responding patrolman on the scene, it's important to keep the scene as is, because if we're saying that an intruder came in through the window and he did something wrong to a person here and he dropped it there, but then it got kicked over here, you know, that plays into the whole dynamics as to, well, was entry made here or was entry made there? The scanner is just another tool in which we use in order to get a complete picture of what was going on within the scene. It is used by our traffic division. There's a handheld version of it, and like he was saying, Detective D'Amato was saying, they can use it to reconstruct crashes. And when they actually do a presentation, all of us, whether it be a crime scene or a crash scene, and you do a presentation on it, it is a really great piece of technology that we use in order to present to juries on cases that really, really matter in the fact of how evidence was preserved.
Wear seatbelts,
Yeah,
when you say
yes.
that, because I've seen the Pharaoh rendition of a program sometime to render everything, but when they just press play, it is remarkable to see something that took place maybe a day ago, and there's no evidence of it anywhere else on the scene anymore, but you can see the whole thing like it's happening right in front of you. It's really remarkable.
I really like the crash reports when they do a whole scene, because you can literally see the car traveling.
Yeah.
And they show the skid marks, and they tell you the direction of travel. I mean, you can actually see the accident as it's unfolding. It's pretty cool.
And accident reconstructionist, that's again, a tremendous amount of continuing education. If you're somebody who likes trigonometry and calculus, well, then this might be the job for you. If you really like having to add simple addition, it's probably not the job for you, because they require everyone to learn how to do everything manually without calculators and sophisticated programs, so that they can show in court that they can do those calculations on a chalkboard. So that you really have to understand the reason why. It's not just as simple as plugging something into a piece of technology or a phone. You have to understand the math behind it, so you can prove up your case in court. And those are great jobs too, because even if you decide not to go into law enforcement, there are a lot of positions out there in the insurance industry, where they double check the police officer's work, and they do their own checking to determine whether or not their client was at fault, or the other person was at fault for the accident.
And they use barrel scanners as well.
They do, yes, they do.
So,
Any questions?
I know one of the things we were talking about as far as like we were saying technology and getting it there, was collecting evidence, and I think someone spoke on it earlier about some of the things we're talking about technology, what we have advanced for us now compared to what we didn't have then. So let's just take instance from blood. Let's say someone was stabbed or they were shot and they injured badly, and someone cleaned up the scene, they made it look nice and perfectly clean, and they used bleach and disinfectant and so forth and so on. Using specialized lighting, we can tell if a scene was wiped up. We can tell certain chemicals glow in the dark. We can tell from that. We can spray other chemicals on surfaces, and if we get the phosphorus or an illumination, we can pretty much tell that was probably blood. We can also detect with swabs, with a presumptive test. We can do that, and we can tell, no, this is blood. So this little bitty speck that was, no one paid attention to it, we can test it, and we can say, hey, that was blood. And with that, of course, we get our DNA, if there's enough of it, okay? There's other misconceptions out there that because I touched this surface, there's a fingerprint on there. Theoretically, it sounds good, and it should be there, but, again, there's a lot of different dynamics that goes in there. Just because I touched that does not mean that there's a fingerprint there. There may be DNA there, but not necessarily fingerprints, and that's what we are trying to find. And with the advancements of our technologies and with some of the tools that we have, I brought a few things that I will show you later. It helps us to get at and to give the detectives a better job of what they're working with, so they can put two and two together.
Do we have any questions?
Not yet.
No questions?
No.
Okay.
So here, I got a question.
Yeah.
Okay.
So after our daily stop at the Dunkin' Donuts for coffee, because we all like coffee,
That's them guys.
and some of us, I'll speak for myself, like donuts. I'm just kidding, we don't eat donuts anymore. What would a detective's normal day look like? What do you guys do? What's your normal day?
Well, so, we have a schedule in theory, just like your mom and dad do, or like you do for school, where your day starts at a certain time and it ends at a certain time. And mom and dad may have jobs where that changes and they get held over and they have to work overtime because something comes up at work, and that's the same thing with us, where they have to come in early. I would say they get to leave early, but that doesn't happen ever. So we all have a schedule, but with CSI and detectives particularly, as someone said before, a couple weekends ago when something happens and if you're eating dinner with your family and the phone rings, you just have to go. One of the nice things about being a patrol officer is that never happens. When you're off work, you are off work. And so you might work some crazy overnight hours and things like that. We don't work as many as we did when we were patrol officers, but we still do work still enough overnight hours and hours that go way late into the early mornings and things like that. So
Very flexible.
yeah, with our day, it usually starts with getting together in the morning, and we will may look like we're standing around doing nothing, but we will check in with each other to see how each other's cases are going and what's happening, and we kind of try to get with bigger cases what our goals are to get through for this day. So if we need to find 3 people, and we're going to break up into different teams, and we have some different addresses to try and some different locations to find them. We might decide who's gonna, go where. Some of the things we do, that CSI will do, but some of these things cross over. We'll also go to places like a gas station to get, video of the robbery when some bad guy goes in there and, holds up the, cashier and steals a bunch of cigarettes or money or whatnot. Sometimes CSI will go get that video, sometimes, the detectives will get it. Ultimately, it will always end up in the hands of the CSI because they are the custodians of all evidence. We might review it, and use it as we're, developing leads in the case. But if in 10 years you ever wanted to know where that video was from that gas station robbery, don't ask me. You'll have to ask one of the CSIs, because that's what they would do. So, sometimes our day starts off with, kind of getting in touch and seeing what what we're gonna do for the day, putting together some goals and things that we wanna accomplish by the end of the day, and trying to do them. Some of the tools that we use, are not nearly as cool or as interesting as the CSI tools, but honestly, we do a ton of reading and a ton of writing. A lot of our day, yes, we have to be out on the street, and there are times where we actually go out and we actually enjoy going out and catching bad guys, because we are still police officers and patrolmen at heart, and we like being able to go out and get a bad guy. We usually have help from other units that help us do that, whose specialty for them is that's all they do, is go out and hustle up the bad guys. But we do have certain tools that we will utilize. We do have machines that we can plug anyone's cell phone in, so if you think you can delete something and wipe it and get rid of all the evidence, no matter how many times you press that reset key, the software and cell phones is such that there's always a remnant and there's always a trace, and we can always get to it, no matter how long or complex your passcode is. Of course, we don't do that without the approval from a judge, which is called like that. GPSs, the traffic unit can analyze the black box on a car. They can tell you when a car was traveling and things like that. So our list of tools is, as I say, not super interesting. It's mostly computers and a couple computer-related peripheral devices that we use to access information. But we spend a ton of time reading reports and reviewing video and listening to phone calls, and a ton of time writing reports.
You have to be a good multitasker. You never know how your day is gonna go. You get it going, plans best laid, that you wanna get A, B, and C done, and unfortunately that doesn't happen because something else comes up. And as the Detective D'Amato said, that most of the time we spend a lot of time doing case preparation and building a case. It's not like TV. We're not out arresting people every single day. In some cases, if they're very large investigations, a detective may only arrest 2 or 3 people in an entire year, maybe 1, maybe 0. And we spend a lot of time, maybe sometimes, proving that somebody didn't commit the crime. And if they didn't, we look towards, that's called exculpatory evidence, something that shows that the person didn't, because we don't want to ever have someone arrested or put in jail that doesn't deserve to be there. So that's very important for us as well. Just because your neighbors or somebody may demand or think that someone should be arrested, we have to follow the law. And as Detective D'Amato and CSI Eric said earlier, there has to be criminal intent. So if something happened but they didn't break the law or intend to cause harm to somebody, it doesn't justify us putting them in jail. So we take a lot of direction from the state's attorney's office, who are the prosecutors, they're the lawyers that put the trial on, and we take a lot of direction from judges. It's a little bit different than patrol officers. If they see a crime in progress or something in front of them, they can make a warrantless arrest, and that means they can take someone into jail without an arrest warrant. Whereas as detectives, we investigate the case for a very long time, and then eventually we go to the Will County State's Attorney's Office, the prosecutors. They say, yes, I think you do have enough to get a complaint or a warrant for the arrest. They type up what they think that those charges should be. Then we go and we see a judge at the Will County at the courthouse. We raise our right hand, we swear that everything that we're telling the judge is true and accurate, and that our investigation is honest. And if the judge agrees, then a warrant is issued for them. And then that goes into a computer system, and if that person is run on a traffic stop or something, it'll show that they have a warrant, and that police officer will take them to jail.
Real quick, I wanted to touch on something that Detective D'Amato stated, and this is a little bit off topic, but it's something that me and CSI Erics, we do presentations at the high schools, a lot of different high schools, and one of the big things, like he stated earlier, was that phones We can get into your phones, we can get into your iPads, we can get
Everything.
into your computers. Pictures that you take and that you send, that you think are private, are never gone. So, think twice before you take a picture and hit send, or you put a picture in your phone, because sometimes pictures wind up in the wrong hands, and if you think you deleted it, it's never deleted, we can recover it.
And text messages as well. We've had several cases where unfortunately people sent messages, that were, inappropriate, and they were directed at a particular group of society or, social class or, racial category, right? White folks, colored folks, black folks, Hispanics, and they did not intend for that to ever become public knowledge, but another person shared that, and, it went viral, as you all know what that means, and, their life has been forever changed. Their employer fired them from their jobs, their reputation is gone, and it's done a lot of damage, and in some cases, their lives were actually threatened. People threatened to do harm to them, which is never right either. But you always think before you write anything in a text message or share anything on your social media or take a picture that may be embarrassing later, because it is always still there.
Yeah, and cyberbullying is not cool.
No, and we always, besides the photos, even when someone says, I didn't take that picture, I didn't send it, and they may think they did a good job of hiding that information, but with the information that we're able to get from the equipment, we can tell exactly where you were when you sent it and when you took it. So that's usually as easy as, well, that's funny, because there you are on the camera at the store, hitting the send button at the exact time that this picture was sent, with the exact location. So some of the other tools we have include the ability to use GPS and use what we call triangulation for cell phone towers and satellites, and a lot of other data that until I was a police officer, I didn't even know existed in a photo or in a text message. And you wouldn't know how to make sense of it if we pulled up a report and showed you what it all says. But we have a program that we empty all that data into, and it will provide oftentimes an address or a latitude and a longitude if they're outside to within 10 feet or sometimes less. So some of those technologies are pretty amazing, and they go a long way towards us solving crimes, but so does sometimes just good old-fashioned police work, which means we also spend a lot of time, and I don't think the CSIs have to do as much of this, but the detectives have to just go and knock on people's doors and say, did you hear anything last night? Did you see anything? Have you seen any cars in the neighborhood? You guys know which cars park on your street. Did you see a different one the other day? Because every little piece of that information might be what ends up making a case. So pay attention to your surroundings. Doesn't mean you have to be a nosy neighbor, but it never hurts to be aware of what's going on around you. And it certainly never hurts to reach out to the police and say, you know, we get a lot of phone calls where people say, this might be nothing, I don't think this is a big deal, but, and then they tell you something, and sometimes it's not a big deal, but there's other times where we say, oh my goodness, that was the information we needed, and then we really need to go to that person's house and talk to them and get as much as we can to steer our investigation in the direction that'll be more fruitful. So the old, if you see something, say something.
Yes.
It's a true story, because you never know what little piece of information. And that's why Will County has the tip line where you can submit your tips anonymously, or you can always call and ask to speak with an investigator too. Because even if something sounds crazy, we will listen to everybody. But probably the most important tool we have as detectives is our ears. All cops have to carry guns and handcuffs and things like that. I can assure you, we use our ears way more than we use any other piece of equipment that we have. Our ears and our brains are our most used tools.
Someday you might hear the word corroboration, and so what Detective D'Amato is saying is if some neighbor says, I saw this red car go down the street at 9:30, that's fine, that's great, but then if we can also line that up with the gas station video that's at the corner showing at 9:31 a red car driving away, and then we can hit freeze, and we can get a license plate off that. That is really nice. I like to trust but verify, So, it's good to have someone's statement, but then it really gives their statement meaning, and it shows that they're being honest, and it helps the case when we can then corroborate, that's the word of the day, corroborate that evidence, that person's statement to actual video that says that car did go by. That's all I got.
Sure. See, we did bring some tools with us. I know we only have a couple of minutes left. I'm not sure, CSI Horn, if we have some things, just to maybe talk about.
In fact, why don't we move the table, so you can see better?
Yeah, let's just do it real quick. We talk about fingerprints a lot.
See the floor here.
Put some paper out so we don't get nothing all dirty.
This is when the magic dust comes out, I think, so. I like to stand back.
So, we have a pop can here. Let's say you come home and you brought your special ginger ale, your diet ginger ale. You're the only one in this house that drinks this ginger ale. And you come home and your ginger ale has been taken and drank, and you are mad and you want to find out who took your ginger ale. Well, as a CSI tech, what we would do is we would try and match the fingerprints. Sure, we could do DNA. We were talking about DNA earlier. And so the first thing we might do is get a Q-tip swab. And we would simply, yes, we always put on gloves. I'm not going to do so. I'm going to pretend like I have on gloves. And we would swab the rim of this here item. And then we would bag it. And then we're gonna take it and send it to the lab. And that, whoever drank, whoever lips was on there, I now have your DNA, okay? So that's one piece of evidence that we like to use. Secondly, and most importantly, give me a pair of gloves too if you got it.
Gonna put the gloves on.
Yeah, because now we can mess with powder. Is fingerprints. So fingerprints has been around for quite a long time. Every person has their own special, unique set of fingerprints. No two people have the same fingerprints in the world. It's been proven time and time again, and it has also been used to get people out of jail as well as put people into jail based off of their fingerprints. So we already have that person's DNA off of this here particular, was use a special powder. We have, pardon me? Okay, you want to go back. Okay. We have special powders that do different things. Since we're in a lighted environment, I won't use the glow-in-the-dark powder. So this here is a magnetic powder. There's actually iron shavings in here, as well as fingerprint powder that would adhere to with a magnetic brush.
And what I'm using, depending on what CSI Horn and I always have to determine, is the surfaces that we are fingerprinting. So that's pretty much what this is. So what I'll do is, and CSI Horn is kind of talking to, and
Put your hand print.
You really use Vallejo's hand right now.
the brushes are a little bit different, so I'm using a swirl technique. It's just something that we develop on our own, to where he's kind of using a little bit different technique. Remember the word latent means invisible. So everything has a latent fingerprint on it. Like CSI Horn talked earlier, a fingerprint comprises of 98.5% water and 1.5% amino acids and lipids. So what we're doing right now is we're chasing after that 98.5% of the water.
So, like he was saying, with my particular fingerprint powder, like I said, it has iron and fingerprint powder in here. I took this can and what we call dusted it. We dusted it for prints. I know that this can has been handled several times, so there should have been some prints on there. And lo and behold, I found many of prints. So now the next thing is, well, how am I gonna get this print off of this can in order to submit it to the lab? Well, we use what we call tape, fingerprint tape. Nothing special, pretty much just Scotch tape. We line it up with our best prints that we want to say, okay, that got some good rich indications there. We gently place it on there and try to smooth it out without creating any air bubbles. But if you get air bubbles, it's not that big of a deal. and we put it on a fingerprint card. Now, since I used a dark colored paper or dark colored powder, I'm gonna use a white card because it'll show up better. And we simply just lay it off like so. And I guess I have to bring that up to you, I don't know. And set prints now. Can you see? All right, so you have all these dark indications. What's special about this here powder is called Ultra Blue. The actual fingerprints is in black. Okay, you see these little black smudges and these black ridges there. Okay, those are the actual fingerprints of whoever these fingerprints belong to. The other excess blue powder is just powder that's on there. So we would then take this and send it off to the lab. And if anyone has ever had their fingerprints taken before, if it's in the system, it will give us a hit, what we call, as to who does those fingerprints belong to. So since CSI Erics didn't have a lighter colored powder, we had Detective D'Amato put his hand on a piece of paper and he touched it, and he was able to get the fingerprints off of a piece of paper.
That's pretty cool.
So this is what we would call, this is the black fingerprint powder that I was demonstrating. This is the magnetic blue that CSI Horn was demonstrating. So what we would do with that, our next step is we would have to take this and we would have to send it off to the lab. And right here, Detective D'Amato cannot be a criminal because he has really good fingerprints. We would be able to identify him. He would arrest himself.
Yeah.
Then there's other instances of other ways that we get fingerprints besides powder. We also use a super glue method. Basically, you take super glue and you open it up, and the fumes from the glue, we contain it. We might put it in a bag or a box or something, and we would put an item, and the fumes from it will adhere to those lipids, to the oils, and to the waters that's in your fingerprints onto the surfaces. The reason why we would do that is so. As you just saw, when I took those fingerprints off of here, those fingerprints are gone off of this can now. They are now on this piece of paper. Well, if I super glue it, we temporarily set it into place. And when I will turn back around and dust it now, after I've set it with powder, then collect it, I can collect that fingerprint 2, maybe 3 times before it's off of that surface, which sometimes is helpful in order, we want to make sure that we got a very good print. I can't demonstrate that because, again, time, and we didn't have the equipment is kind of big to bring all that stuff up in here. We also have chemicals that we do, what is it, the luminol. Luminol is a spray-like fingerprint powder, so think of a fingerprint powder in water, and we can spray it onto surfaces, and as it runs through, like if it's outside or something, as it runs through, it dries, you will be able to get your print from there. Okay.
Pretty cool stuff, guys.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I told you they had cooler equipment.
We have a pen and paper.
Yeah.
Yeah. And a magazine.
So that should probably conclude
Yeah.
the presentation.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming out.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And you guys can always call the sheriff's office at any time if you have questions. If anyone needs a presentation or something like that, I know our office is happy to oblige, just like we did with the library today. And we also do have a youth program, the Will County Explorers program, so anyone that's on today that's interested in maybe looking at law enforcement a little more closely, or maybe a career in law enforcement, can contact the Will County Sheriff's Office and inquire about the Will County Explorers program. It's ages 14 to 21.
Pretty cool.
All right.
Thank you very
Thanks,
much.
guys.
Thanks for having us.
All right.
All right.